Welcome to Movement Monday here on Heart of a Volunteer Veterans Podcast with your host, Daniel Hurd. Dan has been cycling one pedal at a time through 44 of the lower 48 states, nearly 18,000 miles and thousands of engagements to break the stigma of suicide. Join Dan as he engages in conversations with guests that are on their own movement to influence positive change and bring hope. Again, welcome and enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Movement Monday. Dan here. It's the last Monday of 2020, and today we have episode 5 of the Movement Monday series. It's crazy how fast that happened. Episode 5. Wow. As we finish 2020, the pandemic has had a significant impact on us all. The Centers for Disease Control reported that in September, there was an increase of young adults thinking of suicide. 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds considered suicide in the last few months of the pandemic. Depression, anxiety, and loneliness are also on the rise. The struggles that our youth are having during this time is extraordinary, to say the least. But being informed can help us all foster positive outcomes. Our guest today has been working hard to do just that, with her own children and others' lives. Nicole Santiago's oldest son was diagnosed with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, in 2013. She later, too, was diagnosed. In 2017, Nicole began Family ADDventures, that's with 2 Ds, as a blog to help parents navigate the tough job of raising a child with ADHD. She joins us today as a published author, coach, and mentor. Nicole, it's great to have you, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to see you virtually. We haven't seen each other in a bunch of months, so it's great to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. I'm glad that we're getting to do this, and I'm even more excited to be sharing your movement.
Yeah, it's such a special honor. So thank you so much.
Oh, not a problem. But hey, so what is going on with how's the holidays been? You just passed that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. It was quiet this year. We had planned to travel to Florida, but my sister has a newborn, so we did the safe thing and we just stayed at home. Quiet. I mean, as quiet as a house with 2 animals and 3 kids can be.
Of course.
It was a nice holiday, just more intimate with the family.
Nice. Now, hey, so you got a couple things going on. It's obviously New Year's is coming up. One other thing that we got going on is you have a 3rd segment of a book coming out, right?
That's right. Yeah, the 3rd book in my ADHD series is dropping on December 30th. I'm really excited about it.
That's amazing.
So just a couple days, it's coming out.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see it. I know that the first 2 have been doing really well. You got them on Amazon. You got them going out there on digital. So if for everybody out there listening, definitely check out the links below or in the sections where we have everything. We'll have all the links for that at the end of the episode.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's been a long process. I'm excited. I'm excited to ship this to the people that need it.
I'm excited to hear more about it today as well. I've been doing a lot of research, for this episode, and something that I really was interested to see is that I saw in one of the publishings that I saw was that there's approximately 9 million adults in the United States that have been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, my question for you is, what percentage of the population do you think goes undiagnosed or maybe even late diagnosis?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Late diagnosis is in a lot of the, in my Instagram community, a lot of us, if we're late diagnosis, we actually put that in our profile because there are so many adults that are late diagnosis. In my opinion, it's 4% of children have ADHD and they say about 6% of adults. I think it's probably more about 10% for both. Just from my experience and seeing how the world works and working with clients. And of course, being in the classroom, I was a teacher for years. So I taught literally thousands of students in my career. So, you see how it plays out, how the ADHD plays out. And it's one of the reasons that I think an intervention early is so important. So even if you're not diagnosed, it doesn't mean it's not important to understand how your mind and your brain works.
Absolutely. And now, so as the introduction it stated, you were late diagnosed. You were diagnosed the same year as your son. Was that a shock to you, or did you get that diagnosis because of maybe your son's diagnosis? How'd that work out to get that?
Yeah, so the late diagnosis happens. It happens a lot, especially with women. Remember, women aren't always diagnosed. We're sort of we're not. It's just not noticed as much, especially if you're the inattentive type, which we'll talk about a little later. But it's not as noticeable. It was going through the process of testing my son, answering Vanderbilt forms and questionnaires, talking with the school psychologist, and learning more about what the condition was, and realizing, oh, this sort of sounds like me. And then, of course, my husband also was a late diagnosis. So he has the hyperactive type, which is a different type. So it's it's just interesting how both of us were late diagnosis. And then if you think about the statistics, well, there's 2 adults that were never diagnosed until, much later in our 30s. So, that happens a lot. It happens a lot. It happens when you start finding out about your children, and then you learn about yourselves, and the dynamic just grows. You learn more and more.
Wow. Now, so you're only because I know you and I know your family. Your husband is as well been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, and he was diagnosed after you, correct?
He was diagnosed after me, right? So he had a great doctor who just always kind of knew he was ADHD. So it wasn't something they talked about, but his doctor knew, so he was easy for him to access medication if he wanted it. Therapy and those things were there for him. It wasn't something that was talked about in his family a lot. I think a lot of times when you're talking about ADHD, you can sort of see, like, both of our families have certain things in our background with our history of the generations where you can see that ADHD probably played a role. And in terms of Angel getting diagnosis, like, once you learn there's a diagnosis, it opens up this access to medical interventions or just learning about how your brain works, therapies, different avenues you can take to get relief. But if you don't know you have it, then you don't know you need it. So I think it was important for us. We all learned late, but that doesn't mean that we weren't able to move forward once we learned that we had it.
And that's the important part, moving forward, keeping that movement going forward. And I'm glad you guys are doing that. Now, my next question for you is, it's kind of for the fact that both of you guys have this, and a lot of families have maybe one parent that might have some form of ADHD. But what is the inheritability of ADHD? So, like, if one parent has it, what's the chances of it being passed down to a child compared to both parents having it?
Yeah, so it was something we talked about before, and I think these statistics are from chad.org, but about 30 to 50% of, if you have one parent with ADHD, then the child has a 30 to 50% chance of getting it. But if you have 2 parents, the child has a 60% chance or more. You can't say 100% because, you can't, we just don't know genetically that's possible. You can't say 100% for sure, but definitely 2 out of 3 of my children have ADHD, and the third one's just too young to diagnose. So you see how that goes. But in our case, with 2 of us having it, all 3 of our kids probably have it. So that's 100%.
Now, do you think, with your youngest being a girl, do you think that knowing what you guys know, that she probably won't go undiagnosed even if she doesn't have it, but do you think that happens often because of, males are usually more hyperactive, they show it more often in different ways compared to, I think, women? Is that accurate to say?
I think it's accurate. I think it's interesting. So we're looking at social constructs around women and how their roles are designed sort of by society over time. So what you're expecting of a woman might be different, or a female child versus a male child. As a teacher, a lot of times when you were in the classroom, you would notice that hyperactive boy, and it's almost a stereotype of the hyperactive boy that has ADHD. He's running around, can't be quiet, can't sit still. There's girls like that too. It's usually like almost parents will nip that in the bud quicker. Before they even enter school, that girl might be told to be quiet or settle down or sit down. So she's quickly sort of socialized to be calmer. So you might not notice it, where typically males might not be socialized to be calmer. So you can see the way they act more. Of course, I'm speaking in generalities, that I don't have statistics around this, but I'm just talking about, what I've seen in the classroom and what can kind of happen with the gender roles and how ADHD plays out.
Of course. And even with that, as a male, I've heard it many, many times in my own life is boys will be boys. And that's when we're roughhousing and being active and doing our thing. But as soon as my sister wanted to be involved, you need to act like a little lady. So I get that. So it gets pushed out real quick. And so going on to males and females being diagnosed, I was reading a thing from the CDC that says boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls. That's 12.9% compared to 5.6%. Now, do you think because of the fact that women or females in general are usually just nipped at the butt at a younger age and then left to figure it out until they get older and get actually diagnosed, a late diagnosis?
It's more than just that. That can be part of it. I think a lot of it too is the inattentive type, which we'll talk about more, is the type that I have. I don't know if more women have the inattentive type than men. Statistically, I can maybe find that out and drop it in the show notes later. But I do know that inattentive type is something you don't notice. And when women have it or girls have it, it just means you're more daydreamy, you're more forgetful, you don't always notice things. It's not as noticeable in the classroom in particular, because the girl that's sitting there listening quietly, or even the boy, if it's an inattentive boy, just isn't causing a problem. They're not disruptive, so it's not something you notice. And since the classroom is usually the first place we'll notice ADHD, to be able to put that diagnosis in process, get it started, you're not going to notice the girls. A lot of times they fall through the cracks. And so that's for those two reasons. If they have the inattentive type, if they were socialized to be calmer. And then also, even sometimes with girls, I've noticed my daughter, to me, is more the hyperactive type. So, but she really can channel that energy into her artwork or into activities she's doing. I don't know. And sometimes I think the boys in my household, they need to be trained. You need to kind of tell them, like, you guys need to go outside and play, or you have to kind of put that energy into something. Whereas I've noticed with my daughter, she's sort of able to channel it quicker. And I don't know if that's something with the way the brain works between the male and female brain, but I do know that that's what I've noticed in my household, and that definitely the women that are inattentive and the girls that are inattentive can fall through the cracks in the classroom.
Okay. Now, with the classroom and everything else with that, do you think that compared to like maybe the 80s and 90s to today, and even I think in my own experiences, I can almost answer this, but do you think that the diagnosis of women the reportings of women having it are higher now than they were back then? Because growing up, I don't think I knew any females that had ADHD or ADD, as it used to be called. And, I look at it now, and I do know women that do have it other than you and people else. But, I see it more often, and I think that it has gone in a better way. But do you think it has? Better reporting. Sorry.
Yeah. I think in the 80s and 90s, it just wasn't as prevalent. I think a lot of times they were personality traits. So, and I still see that with ADHD, and culturally, in a lot of different cultures, ADHD is not a thing. It is a personality. Like you have to just respect the way the person behaves. And we can talk more about the differences of how cultures interpret ADHD later, and why some cultures are reluctant to give a diagnosis, in my experience as a classroom teacher. But I do think that in the 80s and 90s, it was more of a personality trait. And if it was a personality trait, you weren't going to go to a doctor and try to get a diagnosis to fix a personality trait. But if someone the eccentric or mad scientist, or, the forgetful person who lost all their things, those things were personality types. I always laugh about the hot mess mom. If you know a hot mess mom, she might be inattentive ADHD. If you know somebody who just couldn't get themselves together, even, that phrase like, oh, I'm just being so ADD right now, which is sort of hurtful, because it's they're turning into a personality type or a way you can sometimes be. But if your brain always works that way, and there's ways to train your brain to be different so that you can function within the context of what we need to do in society, but still actually be able to function in a way that's beneficial without feeling like it's a bad thing. So the personality trait, I feel like in the 80s and 90s, it was sort of more a personality trait, unless the parents really had no control and could not manage their household with how extreme the child's behavior was.
Of course. And back then it was just, it was called a different thing. They didn't tie it to a medical diagnosis of sorts in that point. So as children, for you and Angel, your husband, do you guys think that you guys went into your adulthood undiagnosed because of the lack of knowledge per se from the generation at that time, but also because your parents? Do you think that your guys' parents just didn't think anything of it because you showed traits maybe they had? Do either of your parents have traits of this or have been diagnosed?
Our parents, my dad does have a diagnosis, and Angel's mom, I think, does too. So we definitely, that was something later in life for both of them. And I know with my dad, he'll tell me, like, I've learned so much from your blog and from, the information you share on mental health. We both in our families and our backgrounds, we have mental health issues. And that a lot of times is a comorbidity with ADHD. When you don't catch it and get that early treatment, and you're a person, say, who forgets appointments, but you're a mom who has 2 children and you leave them after school because you forgot, that's a lot of shame. And then you start to get depression and anxiety. And a lot of times those things are misdiagnosed. Or not just misdiagnosed, but you do have anxiety or depression, but you also have the root cause, which is ADHD, that you never were able to fix way back in the day. You kind of traumatize yourself by telling yourself, I'm a bad person. Why can't I get these things done? Why am I not like everyone else? And I know neither one of our parents, the parents that I do know, or the people in our backgrounds that had problems, there's a lot of self-medicating in our background and our history with extended family. There's also a lot of positive things too, but definitely I can see where ADHD came out. It's a genetic thing, and I can go back and see maybe it was this uncle or Angel had this aunt, or we can kind of go back and see how people coped with ADHD. And there's great ways of coping that don't have to be medical. But if you don't know you have it and you kind of record in your brain that you're kind of a bad person, or why am I not getting these things done? You're exposing yourself to trauma, and you're really recording it in your brain over and over again. Why can't I get these things done? It's got to be something wrong with me. That will carry with you to adulthood. And then when you can't hold down a job because you haven't learned the right coping mechanism to keep files organized or whatever you need to be successful in the workplace, and you're flailing all over the place and you're failing and you feel like a failure, you're like, yeah, I'm a failure. And then you start to get depression. And then you go to see a doctor, you're diagnosed as depressed. They give you medicine, but it's not enough because you haven't learned the strategies to actually handle your brain and figure out how to make it so your brain will work with whatever filing system you need. I have clients, all of their stuff's out on top of their desk. They have to be able to see it. They don't want to put it away in a cabinet. They need to be really minimalist. They have to get rid of a lot of things because they can't manage a lot of clutter. These are strategies I work with when I coach adults, and they're really important. And I think if those strategies had been in place and our family, our previous generations had been more aware, we might have gotten further. They could have been even more successful or not had as many sort of the negative parts.
Of course.
The negative parts of ADHD. So that's why, for me, early intervention is so important. But we both come from families that have a lot of love and a lot of care, and that doesn't mean, but it would be helpful, I think. Earlier diagnosis just makes it easier, so life isn't so heavy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I've heard you say a couple different things now, and do you see that with ADHD, not to make it I don't want to make it sound like a bad thing, it's not, but with ADHD, does it have a lot of multiple potentially crossing of other diagnoses like depression and anxiety and all these other different types of diagnoses?
Yes. It's interesting. One of my clients I'm working with right now, he was actually confused because one psychologist came back and said he had depression and another one came back and said he had ADHD. And remember, there's so much overlap with any of those. PTSD, right? So post-traumatic stress disorder, comes from that trauma, however you're exposed to trauma. So you could have had a hard childhood or difficult things in your past. Even like women with postpartum depression, that could be PTSD, that comes like the way they handle things. The problem is with ADHD, if your whole upbringing, your whole life is traumatic for you because of the way that you've been facing society and feeling like you don't fit in. If you're that kid that was crying in the classroom, or you're that kid that was chewing your shirt and kids were making fun of you, if you were bullied by your parents or other kids in your class, and not that parents want to bully, but in the 80s and in the 70s and 80s, it was, you need to do, fall in line, do what you need to do. And there's no room for you to be doing it a different way. This is the way we do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's traumatic for someone who isn't able to fall in line. And that's when you get PTSD, when the way you are becomes traumatic for you because of the way that you don't fit into society. Is that making sense?
It does. It makes complete sense. And, something that kind of lead off of that I want to ask is, with everything that we've talked about up to this point, I've heard you talk about several different types. So we understand that there's the possibility of different diagnoses involved. Now, how many different types of, how many different types of ADHD are there? And can you explain can you clarify how they are and how they work out? Because I feel like a lot of people don't have that understanding. And we, unfortunately, as we hear it, we keep saying ADHD, but that's a grouping. It's not the actual. It's not the diagnosis is the group. It's not the whole thing, right? Is that
right? You're doing it right. Yeah. So ADHD almost to me is like an umbrella term. Sometimes I'm like, this is a big umbrella of a lot of things. There are 3 separate types in there. That's in the diagnostic for that psychologists use. So the 3 types are inattentive, hyperactive, and then combined types. So I'm the inattentive type, and the inattentive type is somebody who's forgetful, waits to the last minute, can talk a lot. So if you were that child who always had in your report card, she talks a lot or he talks a lot, that's actually a symptom of inattentive and hyperactive, but even more so, it's just something that comes along with it. Also, like I said, forgetful, not being aware of your surroundings. So sometimes inattentives are kind of like messy just because we're inattentive. So we don't even notice the mess. We might walk right past it. Like it's just not in we're somewhere else sometimes in our mind. We're other places. Mm-hmm. And the hyperactive type is actually also impulsive, but then they have a lot of energy, like just a lot of energy all the time that they need to express that energy. Bruxism, which is that grinding of your teeth, happens with children and also with adults with ADHD.
I'm doing that right now as you're talking.
Yeah, see, and that's again, that energy that hasn't been expelled, it ends up in your jaw. And then you have adults with cracked teeth. They don't understand, like, why do I have TMJ so bad? Why am I stressing? Why do I have all this tension in my neck and my back? That's all related to the energy not getting expelled, all that extra energy. That's the hyperactive. And then also we have the combined type. So that's when you have some symptoms of the inattentive and some symptoms of the hyperactive together. And my son is the combined type, my eldest son. My middle son is pretty pure inattentive, but then also he has the learning disability. He's also dyslexic. So there's also learning disabilities that are a lot of times come along with ADHD. And it's because it's a spectrum disorder. Again, it's like an umbrella. There's so many different things. Autism spectrum disorder can go along with ADHD. Just can be mild to, there's a spectrum of symptoms for that. So you'll have the chewing or the biting or the shaking of the hands. There's just so many symptoms that come along with it. So, but those are the 3 main types of ADHD, and we represent them all in my household. And with clients, I've worked with clients of all different types.
Now, it's crazy that you have all the types in your own household. That's amazing. Yeah. And let me get this. Let me rewind real quick. Hang on. So, can these change over time? So can you be hyperactive at one point in your life and then become maybe a cross version, or can you switch back and forth? How's that work?
In my experience, no. You're pretty much, if you're combined, then you could switch back and forth because you're the combined type, so you show symptoms, you show both. I think the interesting part is when you learn how to manage it, though, you probably couldn't even get a diagnosis later. So this is another thing that's interesting. they say you grow out of ADHD. That's like a thing. They're like, some people grow out of it. How do they grow out of it? They didn't grow out of ADHD. They learned their symptoms and they learned how to manage them. They learned how to manage the way their brain works. So if they're inattentive, they learned, I need to have less stuff around. I need to make sure everything's right where I can see it. I need to have strategies in place. Like I have a clock that tells me the time. It says the time. That's really important to me because when I'm trying to get ready, I'm inattentive. A lot of times we can be late. And that's a terrible stereotype, but unfortunately it's true for me. So I have a clock that tells me the time. It says it like I'll put on every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. So when I'm working, if you're really deep in your work and hyper-focused is another part of ADHD, it'll tell me the time so that it reminds me, oh, you got to get up and start dinner or go pick up your daughter or whatever it is. So once you've learned how to manage those, it's not that you grow out of ADHD. To me, ADHD is really more like a neurotype. It's just the way your brain works. So if it's the way your brain works, you just learned how to manage your brain. And that's why you grew out of a diagnosis. So that's the way ADHD can change over time. It's that you learn to self-manage yourself and you get the right treatments to manage yourself better. But in my experience, my husband's been hyperactive since he was a kid. He's still hyperactive now. It's not changing. I've been inattentive since I was a kid. Anyone that I've worked with, usually whatever type you have is pretty much the type you stay.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that he's stayed consistent through all these years, hyperactive wise, and same to you. But hey, we've talked about a lot of things so far. Let's take a quick break, gather our thoughts, and we'll come back after this break here.
So Movement Monday has moved you. Transform your dreaded Monday blues. But what now? Do you keep this all to yourself, all along, mouthing, "My precious," listening to the episodes in total seclusion? No, you should tell everyone you meet. Every text, add it to the bottom. Share the amazing guests that come on who have given you hope on this Monday. Share and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Hey everyone, we're back, and I just want to let Nicole know that break that we just had, it talked about hope. And I want to let you know and remind you of how much hope you bring people. And I get told a lot, so I'm reminded a lot of times that I'm doing the same. And so I want to let you and remind you that you're doing great things and that you're bringing hope to people.
Thank you, Dan.
Not a problem. And during the break, I was talking to the producer, Chris, and he was telling me that he was never diagnosed with ADHD, but as a kid, he was really hyperactive. And someone told his mother to get him a lawnmower, and so she did. So he went around the neighborhoods, he went around the town and mowed lawns to burn off energy. Do you still think that happens to kids these days, maybe in different ways with video gaming and stuff like that?
I do, and I'm so glad that she got him the lawnmower because it's really important frontal lobe stimulation to have something heavy to push. I have this funny story I always tell about my son and a revolving door when he was 4 years old. He just loved this revolving door, but I ended up getting a really hurtful comment from a kind of judgy mom about him. But he was feeding that need, that stimulation that he needed, that heavy, getting that force out. That's so important for frontal lobe stimulation. Rough housing is so important for frontal lobe stimulation. Those things our kids need. I think it is really important that parents recognize how to help their kids. And when we're going to diagnose someone, it's really helpful because you can get medical interventions, you can get therapies, things that they might need to help them. But it doesn't mean that you can also just help them in another way by saying like getting the lawnmower. You can still get results with those kind of strategies. I think it's interesting we're talking about just kids and how they satisfy their needs for dopamine, right? So a lot of times with ADHD, you're seeking reward. It's reward-seeking behavior, and you don't have as much dopamine in your brain necessarily. And that's why you're always seeking more attention, more rewards, but in a different way. When an ADHDer sort of completes a task, and how a neurotypical person might just check off the list and feel good, like, oh, look, I got this done. An ADHD person won't. They need to get it from something like pushing a screen or, gaming. That's a big thing in my house. My son has his own channel. He is a gamer. It's sort of a double-edged sword for me because I know that the games give him the dopamine hit that he's so badly needs. But I also know that that can be addictive, just as anything can be addictive. I mean, shopping, any behavior can become addictive. So I think it's really important that we look at something like screen time and gaming with the ADHD brain. And you know, the pathways to the brain, the neural pathways, we're either paving or pruning. So we're always building new neural connections all the time. And gaming really lights up the brain, but only in particular places. So what a lot of times happens with gaming is it'll be these certain areas, and not just gaming, but screen time in general. It'll light up certain places of the brain, but then other parts stay dark. You could always change that, which is great. Like you can always, you know, take a break and do a tech break for a week or something to kind of repave new neural connections if you feel like your child is kind of out of it, seems down. With screen time, it's right there in front of you, and it's so easy to stimulate the brain. But if you ever notice with kids, you try to turn the TV off and they like flip out. They're like, wait, why'd you take away my TV? Because it's so stimulating. So that's just something you have to be careful with, the double-edged sword of screen time. I wanted to bring that up.
With anything, there's going to be a balance. You know, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm sure Chris didn't go out in the snow and rain to mow lawns, so there was a balance. And once a week, maybe he did it. He probably planned it out. Like, oh, I did this neighborhood last week, whatever it was. So there is definitely an importance to having a plan and balance to that plan, I think.
Right. Well, but the thing with the lawnmower is that's never a bad thing. Like you're not going to but screen time, that's what I mean. The screen time actually can be bad. You know, so I just want to, go mow lawns all day. Go mow lawns in the rain. I don't care. That's not bad for your brain. But screen time can be dangerous. You just have to manage it. That's all. It can be addictive.
Of course, and unfortunately, it's very accessible these days for us and for our children, or your children, not mine. I don't have any.
Oh, come on! You know your Uncle Dan when you come over here. You can always hang out.
Of course, I'm a great uncle.
Kids, come on.
Of course, I'm a great uncle. So. Now, so going from, just giving the kid the natural things that he can do to burn off that energy, that may not always work for everybody. What about the need for medications? Is that something that's needed to fix ADHD? As bad as that sounds to say, I don't want it to sound like that. I apologize.
No, it's fine. And I know, because that's always like, I don't bristle. Because it's not, to me, it's like you don't necessarily have to fix it. You just have to manage it. But I do think that it depends on your severity. Remember, ADHD is a spectrum disorder. So like you could be, if you have really severe symptoms, I had this other family that I was working with, their son was up till, midnight, 1 a.m. at 6 years old. They had him playing hockey. So he was doing heavy, he was expressing his energy. He was really doing it. But he still was up really, really late at night, having a lot of trouble at school. The parents weren't sleeping because he wasn't sleeping. And when you get to the point that you can't manage your environment and everyone is stressed, that's when medicine might be a good intervention, especially when you're learning to manage yourself. Like there's actually the American, oh my gosh, why am I not thinking of it right now? But the Pediatric Association, they do not recommend medications for under 6 years old. And that's because it can change, the way your brain works. So you have to be careful with tics and all these other side effects that can come from medication. But if you cannot calm down or focus enough to get even one thing done, or just even to like chase your thoughts and just pin your thoughts down for a moment, if your brain is like constantly changing radio stations, like that person in the car that keeps changing the radio and you're like going crazy, like stop changing the channel, just leave something on.
Yes.
I think, that's sort of like how I feel like sometimes the ADHD can feel like, and medicine can kind of calm you down long enough to sort of get focused and get something done. And sometimes, remember, you need confidence. Confidence is the number one thing that we all need. That's what kills the trauma. That's what kills the PTSD. That's what kills all those things that you had, old beliefs you had about yourself, especially if you're ADHD growing up in a neurotypical world. That's when you need to say, hey, I want to calm down. I want to know that I have confidence. I want to know I can get stuff done. So sometimes medicine is just a thing that can give you a little confidence boost. And then, or sometimes, like I have a friend who's a doctor who, when he was taking all his exams, he's hyperactive, he was taking his medicine because he had so much studying to do. he was like, I just couldn't focus long enough to get it done. So he was on the medicine just for those things. And that's different because that's a time where he was managing himself. And when we're managing ourselves, that's all part of the process. There's so many other interventions, though, besides medicine. And I think that's the only problem with medicine is that there's other things you can do too. And I feel like we just want to jump to the pill, especially our culture, like American culture. We're like, what's the pill? How do I fix this? Right? Like, how do I get better?
Oh, I 100% agree with that, especially for the fact that, with my own cause, suicide awareness, I think medications are needed at times, but I don't think they're the go-to fix-all necessary thing. I think that we have to learn who we are and how we work as a person. And I think that's the same similar understanding for ADHD, it sounds like. So,
yeah, totally. We're totally aligned on that front. Totally aligned. Yep.
Now, I got really excited because something that I really enjoy, with mental health is the importance of physical, mental, all these different types of health that are necessary to make sure that you stay in check. But one that doesn't get enough talked about is gut health. And I saw that on your website and it got me really excited. It really did. It got me excited because, again, as my organization, we talk about that stuff and how important it is to have good gut health to make sure that you physically and mentally are healthy as well. How does gut health affect those with ADHD?
I was so glad that you brought this up too. It is it's one of my passions is gut health. And because we are slowly learning, really the past 10 years, they released this research on the fact that your gut is almost your first brain. We always thought like the brain in your head is your first brain, but your gut is the first brain. Most of the communication is not coming top down. The communication is not going from your brain to your body. It's actually going from your gut to your brain. Food cravings or feeling depressed or feeling sad or feeling lack of focus, all of those symptoms are coming from our gut. And the different neurotransmitters even were missing at some points. When I was doing research, I started doing research around gut health because I was studying autism, and I was studying these. They actually had they would do these stool transfers where you could take these pills that had different bacterial strains from a healthy individual's poo. And so you would take these pills and they were actually getting these amazing results. These autistic children were able to speak. They were able to communicate in ways they never had before. And when I started doing all this research, and that's back when I was blogging, it was more in the beginning of the blog, I really was blown away by it. I said, well, if there were these certain bacterial strains that were able to calm down a person who had different needs, why wouldn't that work for everybody? And the truth is it does. Those getting the right bacterial strains into your gut will help you produce those neurotransmitters that you're missing. So where medicine can give you access to whatever neurotransmitters you have in your brain, some of the medicines like methylphenidate, for example, that's one I took, so I know about it pretty well. Methylphenidate will actually make it so your neurotransmitters will stay in your brain. It kind of keeps cycling through it. Whereas if you have your gut health balance, which takes a few more months, takes a long time to build up all your gut health, and we can talk about the microbiome too if you want, but when you take the actual gut health and get your gut going the right way, the good bacteria is going to help produce those neurotransmitters, and they're going to go straight from your gut to your brain. So it's great to get medicine and get access to them, but why not make more? Mm-hmm. And that's not exactly the science of it. I mean, I'm definitely a lay person in terms of the medical part of it, but I know that that's a fact that you can be calmer, more focused, sleep better, less depression, less anxiety, less grinding. I mean, there's so much research now on how gut health improves our overall mental health. And yes. To me, I actually I'm partnered with a company that totes gut health for mental health. It's really important to me. It's another one of my passions. Of course, as an ADHD, proponent, I know how mental health connects with that and how important it is that we do get our guts right. Once we do, and we can minimize the harder symptoms, then we can start to really you can take off in your life when you can be calm and kind of know how your brain works. And that gut health is a really big, important part of that. And it's really pushed aside. It's not in the forefront of people's minds, but it should be.
It should be. And I can't really say anything good about being a role model for that, because being on the road, I was doing everything with almost no money. So I was eating anything and everything, but I was burning it off compared to most people were. So I feel like the calories at that point didn't affect me as compared to somebody that may eat that horrible foods that maybe we shouldn't be eating, that lets it sit on them for a while, and then it becomes part of who they are. So I think that it's, it's definitely important if you're not like, now that I'm not on the road anymore, I'm trying to, other than the Nutty Buddies, I can't get over those things, man. That and the Reese's. I love peanut butter and chocolate together.
I love Reese's.
No, I'll eat a whole bag in one night. It's bad. It's bad.
But exercise changes your microbiome too.
It does.
Exercise does. It does affect your microbiome and gets more of the good strains going. You know what to do.
And it does it all. The food, the energy burning, it all creates that serotonin, the dopamine that we need to stay positive and happy and keep moving forward, keeping that movement going. Now, so kind of transitioning, because I want to make sure I get this information out there. So we talked about your book that you got going on. You're on the third of 5?
Third of 5, but I wanted to get 3 done in 2020, and I did it. So I'm really excited. Nice.
And that comes out in 2 days, so that's great. Everybody, the link for that will be in the description as well. But you are also a coach and a mentor. What is an ADHD coach? What does a coach do to help somebody with ADHD? And what is the resources that are beneficial for having a coach type thing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll definitely tell you. So, ADHD coaching is sort of looking at, remember we were talking about the medical interventions, we talked about therapy, that you get access to when you have diagnosis. You can get access to accommodations at school, which are all really helpful and important. But if you don't know the strategies to help you manage yourself, none of it is going to work as well. And in my experience, I've had people come to me and say, I want to wean myself off medicine. I want to work with a coach so I can learn how to do this. That's where I step in. So when I work with a family, I work with the whole family, because ADHD, in my experience, affects the entire family. It impacts the relationship between the parent and child, the relationship between the siblings. It impacts the relationship between grandparents. I mean, everyone is affected by the ADHD in the family. And if you don't look at the dynamics and look at how, I have some clients that they were burning up their relationship with their child. I mean, they were just nagging him all the time to get stuff done. It was just such a perpetual cycle and then he starts to resent them. And then you end up with something like oppositional defiant disorder, because you've got all this pent up frustration for authority. We didn't even get to talk about how 50% of inmates in the United States in the jails are ADHD, usually unmanaged, undiagnosed, untreated. So that comes from a constant, these parents were burning their relationship up with their son, and you don't have to do that, but you need to look at, when I'm working with a child, I look at their sleep patterns. I look at gut health. I talk about, how do they feel overall? Are they feeling joyful? What brings them joy? And then we talk about building those joyful activities into their day-to-day activities. Mm-hmm. Also, spiral time is something I'm really big on. Anyone of the ADHD umbrella, we don't have a great linear time is not our thing. It's sort of like what's present, like what's right now. Spiral time, it's kind of like it circles back around. If you see time in a circle where things are always going to come back around. So I try, when I'm working with clients, I might try to build in, what are your joyful activities? Break up your mundane tasks, or break up your schoolwork, or break up the work you don't love to do with rewards. How do you reward yourself? I spent a long time talking with clients about what does spark their interest, and then how to build those into their day. I also work a lot with accommodations. So I'll work directly with the school and try to get the child accommodations, since that's something I do too. I understand the school system quite well. I was an educator for 12 years. So I also will advocate for the school. I'll remove parents completely from that relationship. I'm like, can you give it over to me? Because parents are stressed out. Their kids are doing poorly in school. They're getting emails of missed assignments, especially with this online learning. They are stressed and they can't manage all the emails. So I'm like, give that to me. Let me manage the school. Let me, take over that relationship. And that way they can get relief, because ADHD parents that are looking for a coach, or even an adult, if you're looking for a coach, is because you need relief, because the way you've been doing things is like hitting a brick wall, and you want to move forward and you're stuck. Yeah. And what will get you unstuck? And I need to know who you are, and then I'll figure out kind of how your brain works. And then because I have ADHD too, I can come up with 1,000 strategies in one. It just like comes to me. It's really crazy. I'm like, have you tried this? And that's why I like being in the classroom, because kids that couldn't focus, I'm like, let's try this, let's try that. I mean, you have to be really inventive. And sometimes, a lot of times when I'm working with parents and families, the parents are burnt out. They don't have any more ideas. They're like, we've tried everything. And you just need a fresh perspective. So that's what coaching is. Coaching is, I meet with you once a week, talk about strategies, a lot of accountability, because ADHDers, we drop the ball. We might know what we're supposed to do, but try to like follow up is like, oh, I forgot to follow up, So that's where I come into like, hey, I'm going to meet with you every week. Have you made progress on those goals? What are your big goals? What are we working towards? How's it going with the stuff you don't like to do? Are you still getting your schoolwork done? Or how's it going at work? Have you figured out a way to manage that relationship with your boss if you feel like authority is just getting in the way and you're starting to get, just upset? All those types of things. That's what coaching can do. Just give you accountability, give you tools. I definitely also talk about gut health, and I recommend different supplements if they want to take them to kind of help. And then also strategies like, get that clock that tells you the time, how to set alarms for gratitude during your day, like all sorts of random strategies you may not think of to get you out of the rut. Because if you're calling for a coach, your life is not going the way you want it to. And you just need the strategies, and you're burnt out. Usually you're pretty burnt out. And I'm here to take that away, take all the stress away. Like, let's relieve the pain points. Let's get you in a place where you're feeling successful.
Yep. Now, so I've heard you say it a couple of times, and I want to make sure I touch base on this. And the stat that you gave at the beginning of this was amazing to me. So with children that get diagnosed with ADHD, that they have opportunities for accommodations in the classrooms, which is amazing. I love that. I think that's great stuff. And I think that that's definitely a good start for what ADHDers need to have stability and normalcy.
Yeah.
But what about the fact that 50% of inmates, you said, are undiagnosed, or probably in there because of their undiagnosis, because of the in control that they're having at that moment? Now, do you think that how do we fix it so that, what do we got to do to get it so that people are getting this accommodations, not just as a child, but, I know they do it somewhat in some colleges, accommodations, but like after you get out of schooling into the regular world, you got it seems like you just kind of get cut off and hope that you figure it out, it sounds like. Or hope you had it, or hope you figured it out before you got done with school.
Yes. And what's so interesting about that is, remember, ADHDers are also immature. Like, it takes us longer to develop the frontal lobe and all of those. Like, if you try to tell a 16-year-old to make a good decision who has ADHD, they're thinking like a 12-year-old. So if they're thinking like a 12-year-old and you're going to say, hey, you're 18, you're done now, but your brain is still 12, that's not setting us up for success, is it?
No.
So to me, that's why those interventions for colleges, you can get accommodations for college for testing. There's not a lot of workforce interventions. I actually just did an interview with someone. She advocates for special needs. She's a consultant. She works with more highly autistic individuals, but there are workforce accommodations for autism. Like, they have programs. There aren't programs for ADHD. It's kind of like, you just have to figure it out. You seem like you can function. You're good. Let's go. And the problem is, if you are undiagnosed and you never treat it and you never take the time, I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of self-realization work to figure out how to manage when you don't fit in neurotypical society. And a lot of people just don't have the access to that. They don't have the time. They're trying to get a job and just keep their job. So that's our problem. How do we make programs where adults could say to their boss, hey, I'm sorry that I'm running late or whatever. If you're always running late to work, I'd love a strategy from you. Like, what's a strategy I could use to help myself be on time? That's not do you want to get fired? I mean, no one's going to go to their boss and say that, right? Because you're like, that sounds like I can't function in society. Whereas you can function, you just figure it out for your own way. I'm not advocating that we all come to work late or anything, but I am advocating for a way that people can get services. That it could be, hey, there's this or that service provided where you can get ADHD coaching if you're having trouble with your job. Just like we have childcare, right? maybe we can have accommodations like that so that you can have access to a coach or access to a therapist at work, so you can figure out the strategies that you need. I do think mental health in the workplace is more recognized now, and we're trying to, break barriers there and get more access to mental health care. But there's still a long way to go. And especially with our ADHD, those teenagers, those 18 to 24, you're really acting like 24 is like 16, just remember that you're more immature in your brain. So we're expecting more, and we need to get programs in place to help sort of that transition to the adult career force. And that's what we're really missing, I think.
Okay. And I think that you're absolutely right with the information of getting the information out there and all that too as well. So another piece of information that I'm really interested in finding out if there is, for those people that are listening that maybe have had, during this talk that we've had, or maybe had it in the back of their brain before this, is I wonder if I'm ADHD, but doesn't want to go to the doctor right away to maybe in their mind say waste the doctor's time to figure out I don't have something or I do. Is there a self-check? Is there a way that people can go check for themselves to maybe get a rough diagnosis and then maybe say, all right, this self-check has done enough for me. Now it's time to go see a real doctor to get the diagnosis. Is there anything out there that does that, or information?
Yeah, so the Vanderbilt forms are something that mental health professionals use to diagnose. So psychologists, school psychologists, therapists will use that tool to diagnose. And when you're diagnosing a child, the teacher, parent, and depending on the age of the child, they will all complete this form to see if they hit the symptoms. Things like, are you restless? Does it seem like you feel like you have all this energy? You're constantly running like a motor. Is it hard to wait your turn? It has all these different questions, and the questions are in sections. So there'll be a bunch of inattentive questions, a bunch of hyperactive questions, and a bunch of combined type questions. And whichever ones you get more checks in gives you a picture of, oh, this might be me. And that opens you up to more access to medication or therapies if you say, hey, I feel like I might have this. Now, I went to 2 different doctors, and one told me that I needed to do yoga, and I left the office in tears because I was like, this is hard for me. Why am I not able to manage all my kids and my family and my household? What's going on? And even this doctor is telling me, oh, you're fine. You just need to go do yoga. And it really hurt me. And then I finally met with a neuropsychologist. She was just a regular women's health doctor. And the neuropsychologist diagnosed me right away. So sometimes you have to go to the right doctor too. So be careful. We want to go to our pediatricians a lot of times, and they're great, but they're not specializing in psychology. And you really want to go see a psychologist if possible, especially if you get a no. So that Vanderbilt forms are great. I'll link those up for you so anybody can get access to it. It's just a form online. It's a very long form, but you can definitely take a look. And then if you feel like you hit a lot of the symptoms, why not follow up and see if you can get a diagnosis and get some more resources for yourself?
Now, for the people out there that maybe will have a diagnosis in the future or already have one, what information can you share right now with your blog name, how they can get in touch with you to get coaching assistance or advice? How can they get in contact with you?
Sure. I would love to help anyone who's looking for support. It's not an easy road, and I'm here to make it easier and better for you. So FamilyAdventures.com is my website, ADDventures.com. That's my website. You can learn about my coaching. You can learn about my books, learn more about me. I'm Family Adventures on Instagram. Sometimes one of my coaching clients, they just sent me a direct message and now we're working together. So, it's Family Adventures on everything. It's Family Adventures on Facebook, Family Adventures on Instagram, and FamilyAdventures.com is my website. I'd love to help you. It's a hard time navigating kids being home with school right now too. And because I was an educator for so long, I'm finding I'm getting a lot of parents that are interested in help, and I'm here to help. I'd love to help you make life easier while we're stuck at home again. I hope there's not another lockdown, but who knows?
We'll take it one day at a time, and hopefully we don't have to deal with that anymore. Nicole, it was a pleasure to have you. I appreciate you being on the show.
I can't say thank you enough, Dan. I love everything you're doing for mental health and awareness and suicide awareness. I feel so blessed to have met you, and thank you for letting me come on today and chat.
Absolutely. Almost everyone has had symptoms similar to ADHD at some point in their lives. If your difficulties have occurred only occasionally in the past, you probably don't have ADHD, but only a medical professional can make that diagnosis. If you've had persistent and disruptive symptoms that can be traced back to childhood, it may be worth getting an evaluation. The diagnoses in children have led to support in the classroom to those that need accommodations, improved grades that reflect the student, give individuals more options after graduation, and can lead to improved ways of life. When we take the time to learn how we as individuals operate, we learn what best works for us. Join me and Family Adventures in the movement to change the stigma for all with ADHD. With changes comes better laws and accommodations for all. We see the results when accommodations are met in the classroom. Now it's time for all spaces. I would like to tell you who we have next week, but I'm not sure yet. We have several episodes in the works, and regardless of who we have, know that it will be moving. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Heart of a Volunteer, Veterans Podcast, and leave a comment about those thoughts that you have of this episode. As my friend Barry would say, have an awesome this week.
Copyright Heart of a Volunteer 2020.